I'm Joe from Gracia. This is the Rorschach, Georgia update from the 26th of February, 2026. Quick summary of what's going down in Georgia. Tuesday the 24th, the UK sanctioned Georgian TV channels Imedi and Post TV. The UK identifies both outlets as organizations that spread Kremlin disinformation. British officials point to the channel's constant efforts to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty by spreading false stories about President Zelensky and how the West and Ukraine want to destabilize Georgia. These sanctions freeze the broadcaster's bank accounts and assets. British companies must now stop providing advertising or technical services to these channels. This move blocks the stations from the British financial system. Some weeks before, the previous owner of Imedi, Irakli Rukhadze, sold the channel for a symbolic sum of 1,000 lari, which is about $350. He was likely aware of the upcoming sanctions and the damage they would have done to the rest of his business. Next up, on Wednesday, the 18th, Georgian authorities released Gogi Bachiashvili from prison following a surprise plea agreement. Bachiashvili, former top ally of ruling party founder Bidzina Ivanishvili, was sentenced to 9 years for defrauding Ivanishvili out of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency, a charge he previously denied. Prosecutor General's office confirmed that Bachiashvili admitted guilt, paid for damages, and received a suspended sentence and fines. The agreement also ends a criminal prosecution against Bachiashvili's parents. Wow. Previously, Bachiashvili said the charges were politically motivated and reported being beaten in prison to force him to hand over his bank details. After the beating incident, the director of the prison was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Speaking of fraud and crypto, on Wednesday, the 18th, police detained journalist Eliso Kiladze in Tbilisi on charges of fraud and money laundering. Prosecutor General's office names her as a member of a criminal ring led by Otar Partschaladze, Georgia's disgraced former prosecutor general. Authorities say the group ran several fraudulent call centers that scammed international victims out of around $10 million in cryptocurrency between 2020 and 2023. Investigators specifically accused Kiladze of using her news outlets to protect the business. They say she publicly presented the scam centers as legitimate companies to hide their crimes. They also allege she blackmailed rival call centers by threatening to expose their locations in her reports unless they submitted to Partschaladze's influence. While Kiladze denies the charges as a government fabrication, Partschaladze remains in hiding in Russia. Monday the 23rd, Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, confirmed that she is pushing for the total withdrawal of Russian troops from Georgia as part of broader peace talks with Moscow. During a meeting of EU foreign ministers, Kallas revealed a strategic document outlining Europe's firm conditions for long-term security. She insists that any deal regarding Ukraine must also force Russia to leave the occupied territories in Georgia and Moldova. Kallas says that these demands create a necessary balance against Russia's unrealistic territorial ambitions. On Sunday the 22nd, the government introduced new employment restrictions for foreigners without permanent residency in Georgia. Yet another move towards Soviet-style centralized planning. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze issued a decree that sets annual quotas for specific jobs. Starting on the 1st of March, the government effectively bans these individuals from working as couriers, drivers, or tour guides by setting their employment quota to 0. Courier jobs were particularly popular among foreigners. The new rules apply to both employees and self-employed foreigners across the country. While most tourism and delivery sectors face a total ban, the decree allows a very small exception for specialized roles. The government has set a yearly limit of 200 for those working as mountain, alpine, or ski guides. On Wednesday, the 18th, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze said in a parliamentary speech that the government must revise the social assistance database. He said that over 700,000 people received monetary assistance, but a recent analysis shows that 8% of them are actually pretty rich already. That's 56,000 people. Showing a remarkable lack of knowledge about economics in general, Kobakhidze said that poverty fell from 30% in 2012 to 9% in 2004 due to the rapid increase in the money supply. He blamed the outdated database on a moratorium that has been active since 2020, now plans to remove ineligible recipients from the system. In the same speech, Kobakhidze blamed liberal ideology and LGBT propaganda for Georgia's declining birth rates. He says that the births of first and second-born children dropped by nearly half between 2014 and 2024, said that economic hardship does not cause this decline since poorer countries such as those in Africa do not have the same problem. He did not specify exactly how LGBT propaganda, whatever that could be, lowers the birth rate, because that would be a very interesting thing to hear somebody try to list the operational details of how that supposedly works. But nevertheless, he made the allegation. Anyway, he talked about the steps the government took against fighting liberal ideology like banning LGBT propaganda and gender-affirming medical treatment. He said that the government's aim is to raise birth rates by supporting a more nationalistic worldview. Wow. On Monday the 23rd, the American outlet The Hill published an opinion piece by Georgia's imprisoned third president, Misha Saakashvili. He writes, the Trump administration should be cautious when dealing with Georgia's current leadership, adding that while the U.S. has seen recent diplomatic success in Armenia and Azerbaijan, it must not give the oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili a free pass. Saakashvili says that Ivanishvili is lobbying hard to remove U.S. sanctions while running Georgia as his personal fiefdom. He describes a country in crisis, noting that he is in his fifth year of confinement while other opposition leaders and protesters face mass arrests. Saakashvili calls for Washington not to re-engage with the ruling party unless the Georgian government stops its domestic repression and moves away from Russian-style policies. Check the full article with the link in the show notes. On Friday the 20th, the Tbilisi Justice Hall worked past its closing hours to fix a mistake with Georgia's new passports. Public Service Development Agency called citizens who'd received documents earlier in February to inform them that their passports were defective. Funny thing, this recall happened just 2 days after the agency announced that the new passports had won an international award for security. While officials refused to explain the specific flaw, they ordered everyone who received a passport on the 4th or 5th of the month to return it. The agency is now rushing to print free replacements for travelers. On Thursday the 19th, official data showed Georgia's petroleum exports jumped 401% during January compared to the same period last year. The surge made oil the country's second largest export. Obviously, Georgia is facilitating the re-export of sanctioned Russian oil to Western markets, specifically the Kulevi refinery. Recently received its first batch of Russian crude, while Georgian authorities deny any sanctions evasion. Economist and former Member of Parliament Roman Gotseridze says the Russian fuel reaches the EU through Georgian ports. Cultural news on Tuesday the 24th, 9 actors resigned from the Music and Drama State Theater after management removed a solidarity banner from the building's facade. The mass walkout included stars like Nanka Kalatozishvili and Kacha Kinsurashvili. The dispute began when officials took down a tribute to Andro Chichinadze, an actor serving 2 years in prison for his participation in the 2024 pro-European protests. The banner had hung for over a year, but management replaced it with an advertisement for a Ministry of Culture musical project. David Doisashvili, director of the theater, was fired in 2025 for supporting the protests. Finishing off this episode, an article for OC Media journalist and photographer Tamar Charcheuli analyzes the paradox of Georgian cinema, which wins prestigious awards abroad while remaining invisible to local audiences. She explores how the collapse of Soviet-era theater networks left rural Georgia with decaying buildings and no way to distribute new work. The piece details how a private monopoly on high ticket prices shut out the public. It also examines a rising tide of government censorship. The author shows how the Culture Ministry targets filmmakers for documenting sensitive topics, such as the destruction of heritage sites, from activists carrying inflatable screens into villages to the threat of new restrictive laws on funding. The article explains why this award-winning industry currently fights for its survival at home. Read the article in English with a link in the show notes. And that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us. Anything you want to tell us, send us an email at info@rorschach.com. Nach Hamdis.